It was a war, and for the first time we was in control.
They arrest people for no reason, they stop and check us for no reason.
That was the best 3 days of my life.
6 months ago, we interviewed hundreds of rioters. Many of them described the disorder like a war against the police. But what was it like for the officers who were lined up against them? For almost a year, we've been working with a team of academics at the London School of Economics, investigating exactly what happened during last summer's riots and why. Our researchers have spoken to 130 police officers of every rank deployed in London, Birmingham, Liverpool, Manchester and Salford. These are first-hand accounts, some of them anonymous, from the front line of the biggest policing challenge in decades.
As I walked up towards the crowd, I vividly remember locking eyes with a particular lady within the crowd, and she started to chant "murderer, murderer," and hence the crowd sort of followed along and started to chant "murderer, murderer."
Mark Duggan had been shot dead by police in Tottenham 2 days earlier. Chief Inspector Ade Adelaken had to manage a peaceful protest outside the police station. He was in charge that day. He spoke to Duggan's fiancée, friends and family.
They wanted answers from the police in terms of what happened to Mark Duggan. And one of the other concerns is they wanted a more senior officer to actually convey those messages to them. I phoned the superintendent, the temporary superintendent, and he made his way within the time span, which was an hour that I was allowed. But unfortunately, the family decided they had waited long enough, and they started to walk away from us. And I must be honest, as they started to walk away, literally see them in the background. And that's when the wave of bottles, street furniture, and everything started to come in. It was explosive.
The Duggan family had no part in the disorder that was breaking out. Adelaken called for backup. The Met admits it should have arrived sooner. For 2 hours, his officers were outnumbered and under-equipped. They came under relentless attack.
We're talking wheelie bins on fire, we're talking bottles that had been gained from the off-licence, which was literally down the road, been set alight, been made into firebombs and thrown at us. We're talking about, believe this or not, a fridge freezer that was pulled out of a shop and wheeled towards us. I've never seen anything like it, and I pray to God I never see anything like it again.
As midnight approached, police from surrounding boroughs arrived in Tottenham.
As we got closer, we could make out the silhouettes of rioters. The noise then started to increase dramatically. It's almost impossible to hear the radios. It's the most hostile, aggressive crowd dynamic that I'll ever come across in my entire experience as a police officer.
As Inspector Andre Ramsey led his officers on their first advance, he was knocked unconscious. This is him shortly after the attack.
I don't know what hit me, but it was clearly something extremely heavy because it actually cracked my protective helmet. The next thing I remember was being hauled up back onto my feet by 2 officers either side of me. I just shook my head, tried to regain my vision. I was conscious that we were so stretched on the ground. I just felt I had to keep going, even though I knew I'd been concussed. My biggest fear was having a police officer separated. If that had happened, I have absolutely no doubt that there could have been loss of life. I assessed that it was a possibility that we might get shot at, particularly if we were lured too far forward. And I also saw what appeared to be machetes, and so that was sending out a very clear message to me that certainly if anybody got separated, it could all come to a very grisly end.
One of the strongest findings in our research was that police on the front line feared they would be killed. Senior officers, too, were astonished that no police died. Despite these fears, in Tottenham, as elsewhere, police kept charging forward.
We were coming under the heaviest bombardment of the whole night. Supermarket trolleys were being used by the rioters to stock up with full bricks from a nearby building site. We got level with the Prince of Wales public house, and I just remember feeling bottles exploding on lampposts next to me and just getting showered totally in glass. We just did not have the resources at that point in time to arrest people. Our priority was to protect our colleagues from the other emergency services so that they could save life.
It may have looked to television cameras like police were standing back when they should have been making arrests. But officers we interviewed said their tactics were misunderstood. In fact, outnumbered, they say they were concentrating on what mattered most.
We didn't stand back and watch Tottenham burn, as people may gather, which hurts a great deal. We did everything that we possibly could with the resources that we had to try and protect life as well as property. But at some point, I had to make the difficult decision. It was life. It was always going to be life above property.
Over the next 72 hours, as riots and looting spread across England, police faced a level of violence many said they had never seen before.
My colleague screamed, "I'm being attacked." And what had happened is this machete had just appeared through this hole in the window and has just started hacking at his hand.
In Birmingham, gangs fired at police, even taking aim at the force helicopter. In Liverpool, rioters fought vicious hand-to-hand battles with police.
It wasn't looting. If they wanted to loot, they've got a 2-minute walk to the city centre and all the shots are in the city centre. It's simply a case of we want a scrap with the police are here. Let's target the police and have a scrap with the police. Let's get them. They absolutely ran us ragged.
And while officers in Manchester focused on trying to stop looters in the city centre, in Salford they were overwhelmed and chased out. But it was in London where police were most under-resourced. So desperate had they become that some of the force's least experienced officers found themselves on the front line.
When it all kicked off, that was one of my first ever shifts.
As disorder broke out in Hackney, Michael Lewis was on his first day in uniform as a special constable, a volunteer role.
I heard a colleague shout to me, he was like, "Get your baton out, get your baton out." I've never had to use it before. Like this thing that I've had in training, even the small thing that's could be quite default for an experienced officer, was very alien to me. There was pockets of people that were being very violent. Once officers were there, we were the target. They had control at that point, and I think a lot of them knew that. It was venomous. And that's what really got me. They don't know me. But when you're in that uniform, that's what it's directed at.
We spoke to a number of police who, like Lewis, found themselves on the front line with no riot training, protective uniform or shield.
There's petrol bombs being thrown. There was a lorry that had tried to drive through the crowds but had got stopped and smashed up, and that was carrying a load of wood. So that was just like a truckload of ammunition. I can remember seeing our car being trashed. I remember the radio, they said that they were watching a gang of them and they'd broken into a hardware store. And they were getting Stanley knives and things like that, and taping Stanley knives to wood to throw. And it just makes you think it's so primeval. I don't know, it sounds a bit weird, but it's like they're making spears to throw at us. And all I remember is seeing a brick come over the barricades. Before I'd even had a chance to think, this brick had split in two, bounced up and whacked me straight in the eye.
Lewis was seen by a medic and told to go to hospital. He refused.
I knew that we were outnumbered and there was not enough police officers there. And I'm thinking, I'm in my head thinking, all I've got is a black eye and a bit of blood. Like, I can still do this job. I don't need to go.
He and a colleague were then posted outside a JD Sports that had been looted.
There's people coming up, taking photos, because obviously I'm there and there's comments coming from the crowd, oh, you've got injured and all this, look there, what happened to you? And I remember they're taking photos and inviting them over to come and have a picture with us. So I'm there, arms round them, smiling with a black eye, having a photo that's probably going to go on their Facebook or MySpace and be ridiculed for it. But at that time, that tactic was working for me. It softened this crowd that could have potentially got quite aggressive again. To be stood there again, knowing what the potential is, that was what was really, really frightening. Just knowing that you're stood there and you could potentially be severely injured or even worse, the unthinkable, and you don't know what's going to happen. Like, there's a gang of people there and there's more of them than there are of you. And that was petrifying. I hope I never have to feel that again.
Disorder was spreading to almost every corner of London. The fires, looting and violent attacks on police were being watched on CCTV screens in a control room in Lambeth.
It was off the scale. In 28 years of policing and 25 years of that involved with public order, I've never experienced it. I don't think the country has.
Chief Superintendent Adrian Roberts was the Met's Silver Commander, the man in charge of tactics. He also ran the Met's review into its handling of the riots.
The fact is we ran out of people, and it almost became a lottery as to what time the disorder started in what particular borough, as to whether they were going to get the resources that that they would needed to actually put it right. It was just soul destroying.
Roberts was forced to watch intense fires sweep across Croydon. The firefighters needed police escorts. He told them he had run out.
I was brought up there, married there. It's my town. Seeing my own borough then suffering in the way that it did, again was quite hard to take.
But why had the Met run out of officers? Help was available. There is an emergency system to mobilise riot-trained officers from regional forces, a kind of SOS for police in times of crisis. Other forces used the mutual aid system well, but the Met did not activate the call for help until Monday, the third and final day of rioting.
If they'd put the resources in on the Sunday, certainly I don't think would have spread across the rest of the country like it did. I don't think we did enough, or the Met did enough, and certainly I think the national mobilisation should have been put into place on a Sunday, a lot quicker than it was.
By the Monday afternoon, only 500 extra police from around the country had arrived in London, and some of them immediately encountered problems.
We were sat in this car park. There must have been 200 or 300 police officers. We were constantly badgering our supervisors to find out what's going on. The Metropolitan Police Service were operating much of what was going on their internal radio channels. The information we were getting was, we can't access the radio channels and the command channels that were being operated in both Hackney and Croydon. So for that very reason, we're not going to be deployed there. That was the most frustrating thing that I'll take from that night. Obviously, we're all sat in the van, we're taking phone calls from our loved ones who are watching it all live on television. Croydon's on fire, the police are under attack in Hackney, and we're sat in a car park for the simple reason that we can't get onto the radio channel that they're operating on. In this day and age, I just think that's laughable. It just meant that a massive amount of resources that had been mustered into the capital that day were basically useless, and they were being sent to menial stuff when quite clearly there were other areas in desperate need of help.
We never got to any seats of disorder in time, and it seemed to be almost shut the gate after the horses bolted, fire brigade type policing, go, 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 but we never actually got anywhere. There was no direction. We never met our commanding officer, and we were pretty much in the dark.
Those 200 officers would clearly have been better than what was already deployed there. We may well have quelled it a lot quicker than it did. It may not have got to the extent that buildings were burning and, control had been lost completely.
There were complaints from several different forces. One officer told us that 9 vans of police from Thames Valley in Hampshire were turned back from the Reeves furniture store in Croydon. He said it was because a Met commander wanted Met resources. None were available, and so in his words, Croydon burned.
One of the things which officers have been telling us is that they largely were not deployed to the areas where the worst disorder was, right, because of problem with radios, that they weren't on the Met radio channel.
Okay, well, I'm not aware of that. The work that's been done in the longer term around the radios is being picked up elsewhere, but certainly on the nights we weren't aware of that. In fact, the feedback that we'd had was that Airwave, which is the national system that we use, actually works very well, and it was one of the things that did work very well for us. It's true that as a force, we have not had an awful lot of experience of bringing in such large numbers from outside forces. Normally it's the other way around. And there are lessons that we can learn from and have learned from that whole mutual aid deployment bit. But I can assure you that if I'd have known that cops were sitting in car parks, they would have been deployed pretty quickly.
Just so you're clear, what they were telling us is that they weren't able to access that Met channel. And as a result of not being able to access it, they couldn't be deployed on the front line.
Okay, well, I don't know the answer to that particular question around the radio channels. It certainly isn't something that's been fed back to me through the review, and all the mutual aid officers were interviewed as part of our review.
By the Tuesday, most of the officers from outside London had arrived. They helped bolster a huge show of force. 16,000 police were deployed on the capital's streets.
When you had the 16,000 officers in place on the Tuesday, there was no rioting in London. So I guess the question is, would it have been possible to have those 16,000 officers deployed on that Monday?
It may have been a deterrent. No, it's hard to say. It may have been a deterrent that there were 16,000 cops, so people didn't come out to cause criminality like they did. But the truth is that we didn't see the large groups gathering like we had the previous night. So it wasn't that it was there and we were able to deal with it. It didn't actually transgress in front of us. Could we have got the 16,000 out before? If we'd had the Monday night happen the day before, maybe we would have done. But there was nothing to suggest that we needed that many officers on that particular night leading into it.
But the intelligence forecasting the scale of riots did exist, and much of it was on social media. Police told us that sorting fact from fiction on Facebook and Twitter was one of their biggest challenges.
We struggled in August because we didn't have enough trained people. We didn't have the right IT to be able to search the social media. Never before have we had to. Although there's lots of things that we've done differently, have changed and are doing differently as a result of what we've learned from the experiences in August, that's the one that we really need to really get a grip of.
If police struggled during the riots because they did not have enough officers on the ground, how do they feel about the future?
I don't think we did bad by any stretch of the imagination compared to some. I think that the cuts that are coming in are only going to make things worse. You're looking at less people trained to deal with public order situations. We probably would struggle to do that again and to cope with that level of violence, in my opinion.
They say it's not affecting frontline police officers. It is affecting frontline police officers. We will be 16,000 police officers less in 12 months' time. So the next time we have disorder on that scale, Theresa May can whistle as long as she likes. She will not get that number of staff.
I think that'll happen again. I've got no doubts that'll happen again.
We've now spoken to hundreds of rioters and police involved in last summer's disorder. Many described the experience as surreal. Some said life had returned to normal, as if the riots had never happened. But others cannot forget.
I think about it. I almost think about it every day. I've said this to my family, and it's difficult to live with, really. And one has to question oneself Could I have done anything differently? And I still, every day, think about, could I have done stuff differently? What could we have done as a service differently? Very much doubt would I put it to bed, but that's life, I suppose, really, to be honest.